Welcome to the HCI family of podcasts. We're your source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We share our own original research, explore industry trends, and interview executives and thought leaders from across the globe. Join us for practitioner-oriented content around all things leadership, HR, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with the HCI family of podcasts. Tamika Bickham, welcome to the conversation today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, John.
It is a real pleasure. You're joining us from South Florida. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to have a conversation about storytelling and using stories to build support for CSR initiatives. I love this topic. I do a lot of work in the social impact space. I'm a business professor, so within the business school setting, I love this idea of CSR and doing social good via business, and just trying to better understand how we can make a positive impact in the world. Generally speaking, I think is a really important topic, especially in this current climate, this current context that we find ourselves in. So we're going to try to unpack this a little bit and explore the power of storytelling to accomplish this. As we get started, I wanted to share Tamika's bio with everybody. Tamika Bickham is an award-winning broadcast journalist, creative director, and podcast host, touting over 15 years in front of and behind the camera, with a remarkable track record of hosting and reporting over 3,000 hours of live broadcast TV and producing and directing over 2,500 videos. Tamika's expertise is undeniable. As the founder and CEO of MBE-certified firm, TB Media Group, she leads a nonfiction video production studio that specializes in crafting long-form documentary-style content for CSR and ESG leaders. Tamika's talent for distilling complex information into engaging, clear, concise visual stories has garnered her recognition, including the Abby for Best Feature in Journalism and multiple Hermes Creative Awards for her podcast hosting and creative directing skills. There's a whole lot more I could share about your background, but I'm going to pause there. Anything you would like to highlight about your own professional or personal background or context before we dive on in?
Sure, absolutely. And thank you for that introduction. What I will just say, because a question I feel like I get a lot is, hey, how did you get into this path or, travel down this road? And really, my background began in journalism. And I always knew that I loved telling stories, wanted to tell stories in my career. And I think that came from being a viewer on the other side of, kind of consuming media pre the days of social media, et cetera. But, and just how longer form or investigative stories or stories that taught me a new perspective, almost motivated and inspired me to want to learn more or want to do more. So that was really kind of early on where that connection started for me with, oh, wow, there's great power in this. So I really pursued more the traditional news path, and probably because, that's what I went to university for and didn't know much of another path to take. And I think through being a local news reporter, while there were certain aspects of that I loved, I was able to see, though, when we did share stories that really hit home with our audience, the way that inspired or mobilized the community to take action. So I just felt like, hey, I want to do this outside of the news context because the news within news, a lot of what we did ended up being local crime. And I think, especially in the Miami Fort Lauderdale market. So I knew there was a way to tell stories around good and positive impact that could also mobilize people, inspire them, and create more connectedness without necessarily going for the negative or the gut punch type of story. So that's kind of what led me to where I am today.
Yeah, well, and we're in the day and age of clickbait. It seems like everything is about enraging, like because that's what gets people to engage, right? So whether we're talking about social media platforms and the algorithms that are trying to get people upset, so they share the content, they comment on the content or whatever, or click on it or whatever, right? Or broadcast media or streaming media or whatever. It just seems like so much of what we see out there is the negative, or highlighting the negative. And don't get me wrong, there's plenty of negative stuff out there. Like I'm feeling, the weight, the heaviness of the current geopolitical, social, and economic kind of context that we're in right now, because I don't want to downplay that or diminish that. It's heavy. There's a lot, that we need to address. But there are lots of good things, and there are plenty of, the small acts of goodness that are around there that we can highlight. And there are plenty of businesses, for all of the organizations that, could be highlighted for exploitation or doing negative things. There are lots of businesses doing really great things, so we do need to be able to highlight the good stuff too. The problem is the algorithms are built for rage, right? And rage and the negativity. And so we have to like work extra hard, I think, to try to help the good stuff break through. But I agree with you. I think the positive stories, people are yearning for it. They really want it, and we certainly need it in this current environment.
Yeah, I think you make a lot of good points. And it's hard because, we have to kind of think about human nature, because I actually remember being a journalist here in the Miami Fort Lauderdale market and going to my assistant news director at the time. And I think I had some ideas around different types of stories. And because people used to ask me all the time in the field, why don't, when I turn on the news, how come I never see anything positive? So I was like, let me take that question back. And I did ask my assistant news director at the time, and he said, well, the numbers don't show us that's what people engage with.
Yeah, yeah,
And, you know, from a business perspective, yeah, that's what they have to look at. And it's interesting. It is interesting. And I think what you said is right, as far as we have to work extra hard to help those positive stories break through. And, it's not that everything, hey, if we want to advocate for a cause or affect some kind of change, it doesn't mean that we are not touching difficult issues to talk about.
yeah, yeah,
But it's just probably more in the way that they are positioned. So it doesn't feel like that it maybe opens the floor for conversation, healthy debate, and, solutions instead of, this, like you said, enraged type of atmosphere or arguments that just really don't lead to anything, of substance.
with that kind of as a foundation for our conversation, let's start to talk about some of these types of stories that leaders can start to tell, especially within this corporate social responsibility space. What types of stories have you seen to be effective that leaders can start to tell to garner more support for their organizations for these types of initiatives? And then we can start to dive into like the key elements of those stories and dissect it a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think first and foremost is that they have to be authentic. And
Yeah, yeah.
in some ways, it's a little bit of an overused word. Um,
But it's so true.
it's so true. It's so true because that's oftentimes the intention. But then when we start working with leaders within this space, it's like, okay, so and so CEO has to be in this, and so leader on this team or this executive has to be the voice representing this. And that's where I kind of really try to help them zoom out and say, hey, who is your audience here and what is going to resonate most with them?
Yeah,
And not that your executives are not authentic. I'm sure in plenty of organizations they are, but they're also speaking from their perspective.
yeah,
Um, and and they also have certain talking points that they want to hit. So oftentimes I'm looking at these types of stories from the perspective of and then I know when we kind of dive into it, I can get into the specifics, but just the perspective of, hey, who are you speaking to and what action do you want them to take? And based on that, you can kind of drill down into who are the voices that should be communicating this story that help keep it authentic. And that's not always leadership on your executive team. And I think the other elements that make a great story are also just that human element, right? And not having something that's perfectly crafted, and kind of building on that point of having your executive leadership represented in it. But hey, who are the humans? Who are you creating impact for right now? Who have you created impact for, or who do you want to create impact for in the future? And really highlighting those types of stories. And then I think also kind of going back to our discussion around positive versus negative. Hey, you might be creating an initiative based off of a problem that exists.
Hmm.
Sometimes I try to look at things from an aspirational type of perspective,
Sure.
um, so that it can almost open people's eyes to what might be possible, and what needs to happen to create that environment that may look better than the current one we're in.
Yeah, yeah, and it's totally cool to have aspirational goals. I think everyone understands that, and everyone understands that you're not going to be perfect, and but they also expect you to be striving, right? And they don't want you to just say stuff and then not be actually doing anything to try to achieve it, which some organizations do. Like, so some organizations are total BS. They just put out some sort of a public statement and then there's nothing to back it up, and people see that and they know that, and they don't buy it, right? So that doesn't work, right? But having aspirational goals is different, right?
Mhm.
Because it's the whole shooting for the moon, shooting for the stars, reaching the moon kind of thing. Like, people get that. They understand that, yeah, maybe we're not going to quite get to all those aspirational goals, but we're really working at it. We're striving for it. We're going to have hiccups along the way. We're going to have missteps along the way, but we're really working at it. And they can see that it's in the culture. It's in the DNA of the organization. And you can feel that. It's genuine, it's authentic to the dynamic within the organization. That's so different than when you see organizations or leaders just giving lip service to something, right?
Exactly.
And
And
and and what you mentioned, earlier about the authenticity piece, um, like, most people aren't waking up in the morning thinking, I'm gonna go to work and like make a video about CSR and be inauthentic, like nobody does that. And,
mhm.
and they're going to show up and they're going to try to be authentic, right? But the issue is, some people are just naturally in a better position to tell a compelling story, about the issue. I'm thinking of one such situation. This was something I was directly involved in. Time flies, so I'm trying to place it, but it was probably 6, 7, 8 years ago. But I was at an event, and they were bringing in like a keynote, and the keynote was, first and foremost, like, everyone kind of rolled their eyes a little bit. It was a little bit questionable because the person they were bringing in, we're like, really? Is this person the best person to be speaking about this topic that we're all super passionate about? It seemed a stretch. It seemed like we all wondered, is this genuine? Is this authentic or whatever? And then the person last minute who was supposed to come in person didn't show up. They didn't even like live stream in. They just like recorded a video and had that played for us instead. And so that gave us a bad taste in our mouth. And then when the video played, again, this person, a good person, and it's not like they were trying to come across, certainly they would never intend to come across as inauthentic, right? But they just didn't have a compelling story to tell around the topic. And so when the video played, it just felt so incredibly flat, and it honestly was embarrassing for them. Um, and they would have been far better off to just turn down the engagement, turn down the offer. It was embarrassing for them. It really kind of gave them a black eye, and and it gave the organizers of the event a black eye, for even having that happen in the first place. And it was all foreseeable, and it was all avoidable.
Mm,
Yet it all played out because they were chasing the name because they were chasing the title, because they thought that would bring the legitimacy. They thought that would be what would carry the weight. And that's not what carries the legitimacy or the weight. It's the authenticity of the story.
Mhm.
People are compelled by the story, and someone who has a really passionate, great passion and connection to what you're trying to convey, especially when we're talking about social impact, corporate social responsibility, making a positive difference in the world. Like you can't have something that doesn't really resonate. And in this particular example, it just didn't, and it was clearly out of alignment. And it was totally a swing and a miss by a long shot, right? And it was totally avoidable. So, whether you're making a documentary film or doing an interview or like a spot on the news or like a keynote at an event or whatever the case may be, like just be very aware that just because someone is the CEO or they have a big title or they're well known or things like that, that doesn't necessarily mean much. It could
Mhm.
mean a lot if they also have a compelling story to tell, but if they don't, it actually could undermine what you're trying to accomplish.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I was thinking as you were sharing that story about a recent project that we worked on with a mission-driven bank, which is both an MDI, a minority depository institution, and a CDFI. So, that in this bank reinvest 90% of deposits into the bank in the form of loans into low to moderate income communities and minority communities. So obviously, our focus in communicating their impact to the local community was very much so focused around those small business owners or the affordable housing projects and those that live there and the impact that they're creating. And though, so when we knew, hey, we're going to incorporate executives into this story and I'm interviewing the chairman, it takes some time, right, to peel back the layers. And hey, kind of figuring out where we meet in the middle and how that still lends to an authentic story. And as I started peeling back the layers on that, finding out that actually his father, who had immigrated here, and was a small business owner, was a customer of the bank in the 60s and when they first started, and now to him being a customer of the bank and then going on to become chairman, there was like a much greater connection and a much deeper why that I felt, lended itself well to the story versus maybe what someone's natural inclination in that position might be to share. And it hadn't necessarily occurred to him that, hey, this is a story that is relevant and impactful because there is such a personal experience here that speaks to the importance of the bank and that also helped, hey, my father's business that I saw day in and day out be able to survive during a very difficult time.
Well, let's in the remaining time that we have, let's dive in to those key elements. So authenticity, of course, is so important. We have a compelling story. We have an authentic individual to convey that story. What are some of these other key elements to these stories that are going to be really important as we try to convey that to build support for these initiatives within these organizations?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I'll kind of talk through the thought process that I use for this. And, you mentioned, hey, building support for these initiatives. And if we zoom out at the end of the day, it's still business. So
Yeah.
it's social impact, corporate social responsibility team. I always try to understand the why behind that. So ultimately, why are you engaging in this initiative? And then ultimately, what action are you looking for your audience to take when they learn about this? So getting really clear on that helps determine, hey, where we go with these stories. So whether that is, garnering more support or you want people to get involved or to donate, or is it building more trust with your audience? So just being really clear on what the ultimate action is that you want people to take, I think helps better inform the story. And then from there, once we understand that, then understanding, hey, what are the stories that ultimately would motivate those individuals to take that action? So
Hmm.
obviously you have to be very clear on who your audience or audiences are. But if it is, let's see if I come up with an example here. Okay, have been speaking with a nonprofit who supports survivors of domestic violence. So in that case, I've been exploring, okay, you have different high-level donors. Why do these donors give? And really trying to understand that and what is their motivation. And sometimes it is due to a personal experience
Hmm.
and or a personal connection to that. And then in other cases, what I've learned is that there is an organization that has or a foundation that's tied to supporting children. So there's that element. So really understanding that. So let's say it's the children aspect. So maybe we're pulling out like the different individuals they support. And I know with this particular nonprofit, it is women, it is children. They have
Hmm.
specific housing for the LGBTQ community. So maybe in that case, I might look at it as, is it a matter of creating different stories that speak to each one of those? Now, that would depend upon what those audiences look like and maybe the top 3 or 4 reasons that they give. So that's where we can kind of start to outline what those story angles might look like so that it is more customized and speaking more specifically to your audience and what resonates with them. And then I think once you really have a clear understanding on that piece, then from there determining, okay, how do we bring this story to life? Who are the right voices to represent those stories? Who needs to communicate those stories? And then how do we visually bring it to life so that this is something that people can not only hear, but also see, feel, and experience that is authentic and true. So if it is a program with children, is there a way that we can show an aspect of that and that's happening, or therapy that happens for children within that center, and demonstrating that and maybe the impact of that on those kids. So that's kind of the steps that I would take. And then ultimately, I think that helps shape the stories, what they sound like, what they look like, but then it keeps them aligned with the goals you also have as an organization, to create these authentic stories that really resonate, that feel personalized, and customized to your audience. And then I think that feels ultimately like a win-win.
Yeah, personalized and customized for your audience. Just repeating that phrase because that is so, so important. Generic means inauthentic. It means lack of connection. You mentioned, kind of a data-driven approach. Also, data in and of itself is not going to be compelling because people are emotional animals. So you have to have the story behind the data, but data helps, right? So having a data-driven approach with a story to go along with it, that's then provided context and then personalized to the people that you're talking to, that's going to be so powerful, right? So whether you're talking to donors, whether you're talking to, other key stakeholders, board members, whatever, right? Or you're just trying to garner like influence and support amongst your team within your organization, whatever the case may be. These are principles that are going to be just really, really important as you're trying to have more influence and try to build up a groundswell of support and drive these types of initiatives. Well, Tamika, this has just been a super fun conversation. We've only scratched the surface, but I do note the time and I need to let you go here in a few minutes. Before we wrap things up, I wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, and then give us a final one on the topic for today.
Absolutely. So you can connect with me. I'm really all the places. Our website's tvmediagroup.com. And I am on social media. You can find our company page on Facebook. We are on Instagram. I am also on LinkedIn, Tamika Bickham. You can find me there, connect with me. I'm always chatting back and forth with people there. And also I'm on Instagram at Tamika Bickham TV. So I'd be happy to connect.
Thank you so much. It's just been such a real pleasure. I encourage the audience to reach out to get connected, find out more about what Tamika can do for you. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the podcast. We hope you stay healthy and safe, and please join us again soon.